welcome. Happy to have you joining us. I'm James Thompson, Director of the Garfield Center for Political Leadership, which is hosting this event here today at Hiram. And of course, we're here today to talk about a topic which I suppose needs no real introduction, but I'll give one anyways. We're all aware that this is a hot topic, and we all know that there is this country off in Asia that we should be concerned about and that we should care about. And of course, we realize this, we all know this, in no small part because of the people who are running this country. And of course, we all know that the person running this country is this person. Maybe not the photo you were expecting. We're expecting a photo of a rather roundish gentleman with a retro hairdo. This is not him, obviously. Who is this? Good crowd. Okay, we're already off to a good start. This is the sister. Now for 100 points, does anyone know this sister's name? No way. Okay, so I would tell you it's, I'm going to kill it. I'm sure it's, I should actually ask the person who can pronounce this. It's Kim Yo-sung. Kim Yo-sung. And all my sources tell me that the real person in power in North Korea is Kim Yo-sung. But North Korea is a patriarchal hereditary monarchy. Regardless of what it calls itself, that's what it is, which means you can't run that country officially if you're not a guy. And so, of course, the person who is technically accepted as the leader, although apparently all his major moves are thought up by this lady, his sister, is, of course, this guy. And this guy is Kim Jong-un. I suppose you all know something about this man. It would be hard to have missed this in the last many months. Hearing tidbits about this gentleman, we can go into these over dinner. There are endless interesting conversational points. There's a lot about him that's mysterious, but there are some things that are factually known. First thing we definitely know is that he is a practitioner of the art of perpetual smoking. So this man loves to smoke, and just if you've never seen him before, he's always smoking. This is just a thing he does. There he is smoking with a fighter jet. There he is smoking with farmers. He's smoking in a children's nursery. He's smoking in front of a submarine. He loves to smoke. He's smoking and laughing. So that's the first point we should know about Kim Jong-un. Another thing he loves cheese. This is well documented. He's obsessed with cheese. We don't know why. But even more than cheese, we know he likes Dennis Rodman. He really likes Dennis Rodman. But of course, even more than cheese or Dennis or tobacco, we know the reason we care, the reason we're interested in is because he's interested in bees. And this is why we're here today, is to talk about his interest in developing a nuclear capacity and his willingness to potentially dismantle that when we scale it back based on negotiations. And we also know that not only does he have these, but as he has been over time, has been developing his arsenal. So they've been getting larger and longer in range of the density. They've been getting very close to their capacity to reach mainland United States, which is very scary. And so we're interested in this and we're concerned about it. He, of course, inherited his position and his weapons program from this guy. And who is this guy? Kim Jong-il, his dad, right? And Kim Jong-il died back, I believe, in 2011. And ever since Kim Jong-un has been in power. But it's been the same policy, the same agenda of developing these weapons. And of course, this man got all this going from the man who created North Korea, which was his dad. And this is where it starts to get hard to remember. Who is this man? Kim Il-sung, excellent. This is Kim Il-sung. Kim Il-sung was a serious character. He founded North Korea. He fought the United States and its allies in the Korean War. And of course, I suspect most of you in this audience know, because this is an educated audience, that that war is not technically over. We have not signed a formal peace treaty, and thus we have the DMZ, the demilitarized zone, and thus every single day we have U.S. and South Korean soldiers facing across the line to North Korean soldiers. So for the last several years, that's the situation we've had. We've known we have this country we're technically at war with. We know that they're developing a nuclear capacity. We also know that that's getting closer and closer to the ability to hit the United States. All that is disconcerting. It's also the case that various actions and so forth of these leaders, particularly the most recent two, have caused people to be more concerned. Kim Jong-il did things that made people uncomfortable. There are lots of stories in this regard of his personal behavior that we're worried about at the time when he was alive. He, for instance, wanted to be a filmmaker. And some of you may know, because he got stuck running a country, he couldn't be a filmmaker as a profession. What he did, and I can be corrected by the experts if this story is fake, but I've read this in multiple venues, he actually went and forcibly kidnapped people from other countries to come to North Korea, brought them by force, and then essentially had them at gunpoint make films for him. When you combine that with the fact that he's at war with the United States and he's developing nuclear weapons, that scares people, that sort of behavior. Even more concerning is his son's behavior. Kim Jong-un has done things that we're really concerned about. He has a penchant for assassinating people in his family. He put a nerve agent, he had a nerve agent put on his half-brother in a Malaysian airport. The guy keeled over and died. This happened relatively recently. Apparently he had an uncle blown up with artillery shells because he didn't like him. These sorts of things all make us concerned. We understood that picture. We were afraid of what was happening over there. We were concerned about this regime and their weapons. That's where we were until sometime earlier this year, I believe it was in June, one funny day, this happened. Oops. This happened. And I think I speak for most of the people in this audience. I think I speak for most people when I say that we could have never imagined this happening before it happened. We couldn't believe it was happening as we were watching it happen. And now that it's happened, we have no idea what is going on with North Korea. We don't know if suddenly this is a tremendous opportunity, if this is real, if the clouds are parting and we're suddenly going to have good relations, if it's actually possible to have meaningful negotiations with this regime in a way that has not previously been possible. What is at stake? It's very hard to tell. Speaking as an amateur on this topic, I know I don't know. Which is why, given the importance of this topic and the difficulty of understanding it, we brought two gentlemen here today who are true experts. These are individuals who have a history in arms negotiations, in negotiations in general in the Asian region, who know about different weapon systems, who know about this regime and what they're doing, and can actually provide us with facts so we can make informed decisions about how we think about this. So we're very delighted to have them here today. I'll just note also as one quick point before we have them formally introduced by one of our scholars. The gentleman at the far end of the table is Mr. John Lauder, and I just want to extend a particular personal thanks for him for coming. Not only is John a graduate of Hiram, not only is he a career public servant, but he has been a friend of the Garfield program since before I got to Hiram College. It got going about a year before I arrived here on campus. And when I got here, I was introduced to the people who were making this program happen. He was one of them. He's been a tremendous friend ever since, and so it's wonderful to have him here with us today. And I had the real pleasure of meeting his friend today, Mr. Olin Wethington, our other guest, and a couple of the scholars and myself and a few other people got to meet with Mr. Wethington, have lunch with him, and I've already had a sense of how fortunate we were to have him here with us today. But after lunch, I just came away thinking, wow, we are really lucky, given his background and information, to have him here as our guest. So this is, I think, going to be an excellent talk. Before we get down to it, let me thank, as always, our sponsors for the seminar series. First and foremost is Mr. Bill Recker, who's here with us today, who has always made this program financially possible. He's our chief sponsor, so thank you very much, Mr. Recker. Also, Mr. Mark Logan, who is always been a real supporter of this seminar series in particular. I don't think he's here today, so we'll thank him in our minds. Ted Helm, is he around? No? Okay. He is also one of our supporters, and Mr. Michael Canty, who is either here or may be here soon. So thank you to all those gentlemen, and now let's get right down to it and have Jerry Wright come up and give a formal introduction.
Good evening, everyone, and as Professor Thompson said, my name is Jerry Wright, and I'm a Garfield Scholar. I'd like to first start off by thanking all of you for coming to our seminar this evening, and it's my pleasure to introduce our two speakers for this evening, Mr. John Lauder and Mr. Olin Wethington. So I'll begin by introducing Mr. John Lauder. So Mr. John Lauder is a leading authority on weapons of mass destruction, non-proliferation, arms control, intelligence analysis, and research. He gained his expertise over the course of his 30-plus years with the Central Intelligence Agency, National Reconnaissance Office, and as an arms control negotiator. Although Mr. Lauder retired from the United States government in 2004, he continues to be instrumental in advising and shaping non-proliferation, research, and strategic planning activities in the public and private sectors. He has recently been a leader of efforts to improve monitoring of Iranian and North Korean nuclear programs, to anticipate new WMD-related trends, and to identify and supply networks in illicit activities. Mr. Lauder also happens to be an alum of Hiram College, where he graduated with a Bachelor's of Arts. He's also graduated at Yale University, where he earned a Master's in International Studies, or International Relations, excuse me. And last but not least, he is also a current member of the Hiram College Board of Visitors, and as Professor Thompson mentioned, he's advisor to the James A. Garfield Institute Seminar Leadership. Please join me in welcoming Mr. John Lauder. So our second guest speaker is Mr. Owen Wethington. Mr. Wethington has extensive governmental experience working in the White House, the U.S. Department of Treasury, where he earned the prestigious Alexander Hamilton Award, and as the U.S. Department and in the U.S. Department of Commerce. And through his many notable positions include Assistant Secretary for International Affairs, Special Assistant to the President and Executive Secretary, Economic Policy Council, and Special Envoy to China. Mr. Wethington also is the founder and chairman of Wethington International LLC, an investment and business advisory firm focused on advising firms on capital investment, financial structure, and business strategy in emerging markets. Finally, yet importantly, Mr. Wethington earned a Bachelor's of Arts and Master's in Oriental Studies from the University of Pennsylvania, his JD from the Harvard Law School, and his PhD from Columbia University with a focus on U.S. foreign policy in Asia and nuclear deterrence theory. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Owen Wethington.
Jared, and let me start by saying how pleased I am to be here, and let me say to the students of all ages here today how important I think this Garfield Scholars Program is, and it is easy these days in many ways to be cynical. But at the outset, I want to put in a very strong plug for all who go into public service, and there are many forms that takes. It's not necessarily government. You participate in this democratic system in a lot of different ways. But believe in it and act on it. And I think the exposure you're getting from what I have learned about the Garfield program is very, very important, and I hope someday to see you. If I lived out longer, a lot younger than I am, in very high places with impact on this very, very complicated world. Let me also thank the Garfield program and Hiram College for this invitation, and I want to specifically say thank you to you, Professor Thompson, and also to Kathy Luschek, yes, who was very much involved in the arrangements for this program and for getting me here today, and also to my good friend John Lauder, with whom I have conspired on a number of things of interest, including a so-called 1.5 track consultation that I was involved in organizing through the Atlantic Council and the Brett Scowcroft Center in Washington on the Korean nuclear issue and security matters in Northeast Asia. And we traveled together for, 10 days, something like that, and we're involved in bilateral consultations with experts and government officials bilaterally in South Korea, Japan, and China, for the purpose of trying to determine the extent of common interest on the part of those countries in working toward a solution to the Korean nuclear challenge. And also seeking to determine whether it might be possible to frame an agenda that could bring them together around a common table with that goal in mind. And there were some other things we've conspired on as well. So thank you, John, for encouraging this invitation here today. Since we're in Ohio, I wanted to start by taking note of the fact that the production, the gross domestic product in the state of Ohio is approximately $700 billion a year. That's basically a current figure, as I understand it. That number is 25 times the size of the country of North Korea, the DPRK. And it's 25 times larger in its economic output, even though it's only 40% the size of the population. And if we were to draw a comparison to South Korea, the South Korean economy, which is around the 11th or 12th largest economy in the world, is 50 times larger than its adversary to the north, and twice the size of the population. Now, I cite those disparities because it stands in such sharp contrast to the nature of the two systems that we find on either side of the 38th parallel. One a closed economy, one an authoritarian government, repressive in many, many ways, with an abysmal human rights record, and the other a thriving market economy and a thriving democratic political system. Now, the contrast is also sharp in a number of other ways, and there are several things that jump out at me when I put North Korea in context. One of those is that North Korea has the fourth largest military in terms of active military personnel, the fourth largest in the world, even though its economy is roughly number 125 in the world. Its GDP, it's estimated, these are only estimates, is about 25% of its total output. I mean, what it spends on military is about 25% of its total output. And its capacity in military terms is striking, not only in terms of numbers of military personnel, but in terms of the capability it fields by way of artillery, tanks, armor, asymmetric warfare capability, even chemical, laser, and cyber capability, which also brings us to its nuclear capability, now estimated between 30 and 60 nuclear warheads. It has conducted since Kim Jong-un came to power roughly 85 missile tests and 4 nuclear tests. It has achieved, in fact, nuclear status without any doubt. Now, we have seen this develop over 3 decades. This is obviously not a recent development. It has been a rogue state for roughly 4 to 5 decades since the end of the Korean War. A closed society, closed in economic terms, a poor society, a hermit kingdom, and miserable in terms of its human rights record. Having said this, back in the mid-1980s, North Korea did ratify the Non-Proliferation Treaty back in 1985. It has declared its willingness not to test, not to produce, not to use nukes on many occasions since then. There's been a cycle of confrontation, then negotiation, then agreement, then stand down of concessions, breach of understanding, and this cycle has been repeated 3 or 4 times over the course of those years. As I said, in 1985, North Korea ratified the NPT. In 1992, North Korea and South Korea agreed not to test, produce, or use nukes. In 1994, what was probably the first significant agreement, what was the first significant agreement, I'll be more definitive, between the United States and Korea, the so-called agreed framework was put in place where North Korea agreed to freeze its nuclear weapons program. Then, in 2005, there was the so-called joint declaration, which was worked out through the so-called 6-party talks, where once again, North Korea agreed to abandon the pursuit of nuclear weapons, and it agreed to permit inspectors from the IAEA. Then again in 2008, North Korea declared some nuclear sites within its country, a major issue today. And then again in 2012, the so-called Leap Day Agreement, where North Korea again agreed to a moratorium on nuclear and missile testing and agreed to open itself to international inspection. So why do I cite these? I cite it to reinforce the fact that we have perhaps, although not for sure, hopefully not for sure, seen this act before. During the second term of the Obama administration, we, partially in frustration and partially because I think the way forward was not clear, the view was the moments were not ripe for a negotiated diplomacy and military options are limited, entered into a phase of so-called strategic patience. I think politically in this country, by the 2016 election, there was, I think, a bipartisan consensus that strategic patience had not succeeded, that North Korea was continuing to develop its nuclear and missile capability, and that the United States and other allied countries could not continue to stand by. I emphasize the bipartisan nature of that understanding. In my view, it was not peculiar to the current president. It was a view broadly shared that something needed to change. So this administration, reflecting, I think, that consensus, moved to a strategy of so-called maximum pressure, which had both a military component as well as an economic component. Economic sanctions were ramped up to a level not heretofore seen. Diplomacy in the first year was part of the the concept, but the emphasis was on pressure, putting as much pressure as we could in both the military and economic sphere, short of actual conflict. But in that period, as you know, in 2017, we entered a period of high tension. I don't know whether we went to the brink of war, but we certainly were moving up a ladder, at least of rhetorical escalation. References to Little Rocket Man, a reply, he's mentally deranged, he's a dotard, as you might look that one up. Comparisons back and forth as to the size of one's respective nuclear button, so-called. I guess maybe that's a guy thing, I don't know. Talk about raining down fire and fury. That was the atmosphere in 2017, last year, and how quickly that seems to have changed. Began to change, I think, in the latter part of 2017 with the cessation of missile testing. No more nuclear testing, actually, since 2016, if I recall. The Winter Olympics, the presence of North Korea at that event, although they only qualified 2 people in one event, or a figure skating event. But behind the scenes, parties were working. I think that applies both to the North Korean side. I think in particular it applies to South Korea. A tremendous effort, particularly by its intelligence leadership. It applies, I think, here in very quiet ways, and also to the Chinese. And as we know, there was a breakthrough. We saw the first North-South Korean summit in 11 years, in April of this year. That was followed by a second head of state meeting, and then the summit in Singapore, followed by yet another North-South summit in August. It seems at times we're almost in an extraordinary kind of world where our leader here has, despite the past, declared that North Korea is no longer a nuclear threat. He is now a great guy. We exchange so-called love letters at times, missives between heads of state, and we are embarked on a new path of diplomacy. It is a path I think we must take seriously. I think leadership level engagement has made a difference. We don't, however, know the outcome of the process that's been started. The elements of agreement, I think, fall into several categories. And let me say, I have learned over the years that when one talks as an observer from the outside of government, one must do it with some degree of humility, because we don't know, in many instances, despite a lot of leaks at times, exactly what the nature of conversation and discussion is. But if we look at the public declarations that surround the various head of state summits, I think we can break down into maybe 4 categories what has been apparently agreed to date. One is a category of what I would call inter-Korean exchange and elements of potential reconciliation. This is North-South activity. It extends to the prospect of new economic exchange, connection of roads, railways, a joint liaison office, meetings cross-border among military officials, humanitarian exchange, the prospect of reuniting families. That is one area. And those discussions are moving with some degree of deliberation. Progress has been made in this category. This is not a category that the U.S. is directly a party to. Again, this is North-South Korean activity.